So So Michael may be the only actual enterprise here. Is there anybody else here who's from an actual enterprise? I think not. Everybody is either vendor or ISP, service provider. So Michael, he's from one of the largest health insurance companies in the United States. I remember they all get together every 3 months. And I remember sitting around the table with them, and one of the guys said, this is 1/12 of the U.S. economy sitting right here around this table. Health insurance, as you might know, is a large.
Don't we pause it while she's speaking, though? This could go on forever. I don't.
You guys really. No respect. Okay. Okay. So I've known Mike for a million years. It seems like we're actually very dear friends. And so
I'm
Mike,
older than I look, then. Huh?
he's a senior architect at Blue Cross. And Mike, why don't you start off by telling everybody how you got involved in the IETF?
Oh, wow. That was a long time ago. More than a million years, maybe. Actually, a topic that I'll probably refer to here. When I was first exposed to IPv6, there were a couple fields that we used for diagnostic purposes that appeared to be missing. And we said, well, what are we going to do without that? And it was actually IP ID, if anybody knows what that is. Pretty boring stuff unless you're reading packet headers all the time. I lead a rough life. So we got together and said, well, what are we going to do without that? It's going to make our jobs tougher, and our jobs are tough enough, so what are we going to do? So, well, we got to change IPv6. Well, who does that? Well, there's something called the IETF. We didn't know what that was. And so we showed up at a meeting 5-6 years ago, maybe. I know where it was. It was in Quebec City. And we got yelled off the stage because nobody understood us, and they still don't. But and I think when Nalini was asking you all, is there anybody here from Enterprise other than myself, I didn't see any hands. Yeah, so that's kind of the way it is at IETF, and they don't understand us. It's getting a little better. People like Lee and Fred Baker and others are encouraging us to come and let our cases be known, and that's going to help a lot. And I'm glad you asked me to say that. I wasn't going to say anything about that, but it kind of gives you some background about what the issue that I'm going to now talk about here today is. So as Nalini said, I'm Mike Ackermann. I work for Blue Cross Blue Shield, which needs no explanation in the United States. The next question is, well, I have this claim problem, and I'd like to talk to you. But overseas, not everybody knows who Blue Cross Blue Shield is, but we're a large health insurance provider. So that's our story. And I'm going to talk about IPv6 and the status at our enterprise and at others that I work with and the way it looks today. Went the wrong way. So this could be a short presentation. This is an old joke slide that I used to use. IBM used to use it when they didn't know what to say. They'd say this page intentionally left blank. So I kind of don't know what to say because we don't have much status at enterprises. So I guess that's the end of my presentation, and thank you very much. Nalini, I yield 36 minutes and 56 seconds. Now, are you happy? Okay. We finally got her to smile. But more seriously, here's what we're going to try to cover today. I'm going to talk about at my enterprise, what we've accomplished. I'm going to talk about what we haven't accomplished. And then I work with a lot of other Blue Cross plans, of banks, a lot of business partners, and other enterprises, and I know a little bit about what they've accomplished and not accomplished. And then we're going to start to get into what I'm really here for, and that's, why are we experiencing such little progress? And what do we do about it, and what can we do collectively? And on my slides, and it looked like Lee used this trick too, anything in red is usually what I think is important. What I think is important here is that I do want you all, even in spite of the last couple presentations, I want you all to ask questions and talk, because I think what you'll find is I have more questions than I do answers contained in this deck. So help is needed, and maybe together we can accomplish some things and move some things ahead. So I'm going to keep going. Again, at any time, step up to the mic and ask a question or tell me I'm crazy, even though we already know that. I'm going to talk about what we've accomplished so far. And we've done a lot of information gathering, we've done a lot of research, we've done some training, we've made some good contacts. Delaney talked about some of that, you know, at IETF as one of the organizations. We have some other vendors, we've talked to other customers, we have some partners there. And, but let's get into some of the meat of some of the things we've actually done. By the way, I needed to find a term. BOC is the organization that Nalini referred to, where our national advisory board gets together 3 times a year and we address common issues to Blue Cross plans and other business partners that work with us in our coalitions. And as a quick plug, I have a very good friend and knowledgeable person that's going to be presenting there in December, and that's Mr. Lee Howard. So I'm looking very forward to that. But some of the things we have done is we've applied for and gotten an IPv6 address. We've created an address plan. And again, this is just at my organization. The little arrow there is just my comment that actually that should go before applying for the IPv6 address, because you don't know what you're applying for, you don't know how big it should be, you don't know how you're going to use it. The RIRs that you're going to be requesting this of kind of look at you cross-eyed and say, well, what do you think you're going to do? Why do you need that? So if you can, look at developing an IPv6 addressing plan first. You might need to get some help. I know some really good people that can help you, but definitely look into that. We've looked into some of our use cases and priorities, and we've built a draft migration plan. Comment from me and many others is when you put your migration plan and your use cases together, also include transition technologies, because you're not going to jump from V4 to V6 overnight. They're going to need to coexist, and there's different ways to make that happen. We'll talk about a couple of them, but that's an important thing to address. Because a lot of this is new, maybe all of it's new, it's more important to have a lab environment here than almost any other technology that I've explored lately. So that's in red as well. So please consider doing that. Now this, I may have multiple slides here. What have we not accomplished? And the main thing is, even though it sounds like we've done a fair amount on the previous slides, it's not really going anywhere. We don't have it turned on at any of the routers. There's no layer 3 forwarding of IPv6, so it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do anything. It's kind of there in name only. So another way of saying that is it's limited to subnet traffic, excuse me, and in our lab. So that's not very much. I mean, it's not anything real. So we're basically using V4 for everything we do that's important. So I should probably say that again, because that's probably unbelievable to many of you. It's unbelievable when I talk to people at IETF about that, but that's the case. In the testing environment, our lab is kind of dormant. A few years ago, we talked about how important IPv6 was, and Eleni was on a couple of the coalitions with us. And we put together some plans, some ideas, the lab, and then it kind of died off. And we weren't doing anything. And Michael, I'm going to get you in just a second. So the reason for that is the last bullet there, and this is another key one that we need to keep thinking about, is that it's not considered a need now or for the foreseeable future. That's predominant in everything that we talk about in enterprises today, and it's unfortunate. Michael.
So if I understand what you just said, you have a switch in which you allow V6 traffic in your lab to do things, but it has no router and it has no connectivity to the rest of the world. Okay, I understand that you haven't turned V6 on for your enterprise and your infrastructure, but you don't even have a cable that goes to the outside of your firewall, and having asked one of your providers to give you V6 transit even into just your lab.
Embarrassingly, he said yes.
Okay,
right.
that's really I mean, it's really sad for me. I understand the thing, but to me, the value in an enterprise, and I'm really thrilled that you have a lab. The value in the enterprise is that someone can go and plug something in and figure out how does this really work, right? And the problem is that you have no idea how it works until you do it. And so, I mean, from what an interesting conversation I've had with a bunch of other people where we're trying to do some work that involves V6, and it would be fine in a lab. And they've actually said, well, you know what? Our lab actually has an LTE router to an LTE provider that happens to provide V6, and we can do that, but just don't tell anybody. Right?
The world's best kept secrets.
Right,
Yes,
and it's sort of like, and I'm like, okay, that's an actually really interesting thing, because that means that you can actually do your work and you don't have to worry about it. And I'm just suggesting you might want to consider something like that. Just 1/64 and you're kind of good, right?
I'm in total agreement with you. And our lab, I think 3 years ago, had a connection, an IPv6 connection.
Oh, it
to
did?
the
Okay.
internet, and then we decided, or management decided that we were not using it, it wasn't important, and it was a security exposure, and they had all kinds of reasons. So that it's no longer connected to the internet.
What
and
did
it's
it
no longer
cost?
connected to our corporate network.
And-
so it's just an isolated
And
network.
it was killed by cost?
Nah, I think it was more fear than cost.
Fear rather than cost.
It was a single T1 link. It wasn't, and we had it on a DS3 to
What's a
AT&T.
T1?
Yeah, exactly. That tells you how long ago that it was and how small it was. So yes, that's it's unfortunate, but that and yet, Michael, I want you to hear this part. As embarrassed as I am, most of the enterprises I deal with don't even have a lab, much less where is it connected. And you're right that at least we can go and look and take some of the fear and doubt out of what IPv6 is doing to us. We can see that it's not so bad, and we can see it has benefits. Most don't even have that luxury. Nalini?
Nalini Elkins. Okay, I think a lot of what this is showing is the complete and total disconnect between what people at the IETF do and what real life at real enterprises looks like. And it's just a very different thing. And one of the things that Lee and Michael and I are doing is we are trying to provide a lot of free training because people won't even shell out any kind of money. These are not poor people. Let me just tell you something. I'm telling you, 1/12 of the U.S. economy is people, him and his consortium.
Yeah, and back to Michael's point, so it's not a cost
It's
issue.
not. It has
We
nothing to
got
do
the
with
money.
cost.
It's how
They
we
got
choose
plenty
to
of money.
spend time and money. And what you're talking about, I do have a slide coming up on.
Okay.
talk
Let me.
about.
Then I'll stop. I don't want to. Yep.
Stay near the mic.
Oh.
The microphone, not me. Elliot.
Hey there, good morning. I understand your pain here. It's definitely a challenge to say, well, I have connectivity. Well, why do I want to buy anything that doesn't actually give me more connectivity, and do I need more connectivity? Well, now, Lee worked at a very large cable provider that delivers out IPv6 connectivity, and I use a very large cable provider that delivers out IPv6 connectivity, and as of late, they've run into some problems with their carrier-grade net. So actually, the IPv4 connectivity is degrading. But had I known IPv6 was so scary, next year maybe what I'll do for Halloween is be an IPv6 address.
Yeah, and I'll go as an extension header, and we'll scare the heck out of everyone. Good comments, everyone. Please keep them coming. All right, so that's the bad news. Here's the worst news. Others that I work have accomplished less. If you can remember back to some of the things I said that we've done. Information gathering, they've done some. Most don't even want to talk about the subject because they say it's not coming, we don't really care, we'll use NATs, whatever. Research and training, very little. The contacts, again, some, but not much. And very, very, very few have even applied for an address. Have any created an address plan? None that I'm aware of. Some of them talk to me that they want to see mine. And then they don't follow up, so they're not even really serious about that. Identifying their use cases and priorities, very few there. Migration plan, pretty much none. Well, one exception, because Nalini built one for the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association about 8 years ago, and that's in mothballs now. And then the IPv6 lab, we actually started to build a consolidated one at multi-plan level, and then we have ours, and those are the only two that I know of. So that's a whole bunch of bad news there. So I think the real reason that I'm here is so you can help me figure out why this is the case and what we can do about it. We've talked, and people at the mic have talked a little bit about some of these reasons already. One is that you hear this continuously, that we can use IPv4 forever. And there's so many people that think that. They don't see what's coming. And the second bullet here is that enterprises, I'm going to say this very loud because enterprises are focused on the fires of the day, or du jour. I'm trying to be cultured there. And that's our problem. We don't look ahead. IPv6 isn't that far ahead, but it is a look-ahead issue, and we're busy putting out fires today. Other reasons are that we have these short-term solutions like NATs and proxies and addressing our way out of these things, or maybe buying more IPv4 addresses. And I think you covered that. I don't think that's a good solution, but hey, that's way better than going to IPv6, that scary beast off on Halloween of next year. Where'd Elliot go? So at best, it's considered as a future need. And most people follow up by saying maybe. Here's one of the problems that I see when I talk to people like that is that they say, yeah, maybe it'll be here in a couple years, 2-3 years. But they also agree that it's a pretty big thing to prepare for. And it's going to take, I'm going to say most estimates are 1 to 3 years to prepare completely and properly. So there's something wrong with that math. That doesn't add up. So we're setting ourselves up for a big failure if both those numbers are accurate. And I'm going to pause because I think we have another comment.
So I have a question about some of these CIOs. No, I'm really curious because I would like to know how many of them were CIOs in 1995. None. That's the problem, right? And in 1995, there was no business case for IPv4. LAN manager and blah, 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 we were going to work just fine. Websites would be employees don't need web
at the time.
Yes, web browsers don't. Yeah. Employees won't need web browsers. They won't need any of this stuff. If you want to get a website, you'll get that done by somebody else externally. It would be really interesting if we could find some CIOs that are still alive from 1995. Because they may have been quite old, and that maybe they retired when they realized that when someone
pointed they have a lifespan of 2 years.
Well, there might not have been CIOs in 1995. Yep. That's, I think, the other point is that they didn't exist.
That's right.
They were there. So it'd be interesting to find if we could.
Sea-level wasn't as populated a couple of decades ago.
Well, it wasn't even called that, right? But it'd be interesting to find senior managers that who have the memory of IPv4. And I've heard this from ISPs or telephone companies rather, and they say, well, what's the business case for IPv6? I said, well, you had no business case for IPv4. 1995 came along, and you suddenly had egg on your face because you hadn't even paid attention.
Yep. Okay.
And I think that's one of the things to remind them, and it says that you were unprepared last time. Okay. That's cool. You want to do it again. That's cool. You can wait till 2003 to get a website, or you can be among those who have hundreds of thousands of employees worldwide that now sell networking products that didn't exist in 1995. And I'm curious. It was just interesting to know, and maybe you'll have a conversation with your guy, your CIO, and maybe he knows, because he must know who you're.
Crazy.
Huh? He thinks you're crazy,
yeah,
but
well, he's probably right,
but the interesting, I think the thing that I think that the only way to fight their fear of IPv6 is with the fear of what if they don't do anything.
Yeah.
Right?
We were late in doing that. It cost us some business opportunities, and I think that's kind of the point you're making. You think people learn from that, and you raise that up again, and what they say is, oh no, this is different. This is just two different versions of IP.
Yeah.
You know,
well, it's not.
It's very similar to me, and I think that's what you're saying too.
Yeah, and it's much easier. The transition is is much easier than from IPX to IPv4. That the transition is vastly different, but. Anyway.
Yeah, I wish I could argue with you. I'm in total agreement, though.
Now, Mike, okay, two things. Mike, I want you to tell the story about about you and the internet at your company. You remember which story
Oh,
you knew?
that was the first time I was considered crazy.
Yeah, no, he nearly got he nearly
Yeah.
got fired. It's a really good story, so I want you to tell that. And the second thing is we really we do have a strategy. I don't know if you're going to talk about, with NIST and the CIOs. We are trying to work with NIST to get a bunch of the CIOs. NIST is in the US, it's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, to get a bunch of the CIOs together, because 100% they're not going to listen to me or Michael. They're like, who the heck are you guys?
Yeah.
So anyway, but tell your story.
Stay near the mic there, but no, you can sit down. But yeah, we keep referring to this slide that's coming up that I'm going to need your help on. Many years ago, I was a network engineer I would go out to customer sites and decide what was the best way to connect to us. And one of our institutions of higher learning said something about the internet, which I didn't know what it was at the time, and that made perfect sense to them. We weren't doing it, so I went back and I did some research and I talked to them some more. I said, this is something we should probably do. And that's the other time I almost got fired, was for promoting a network technology that was only college students and hackers. That's what my CIO, although Michael said there was no CIOs at the time, and there wasn't, but that was my executive VP. That's what she told me, and that I was going to lose my job if I pursued this any further. I was honestly told that. I'm not exaggerating this. What nobody knew at the time was that institution of higher learning had a alumnus at our company who was our president and CEO, and they went backdoor to him, and guess what? We were on the internet a couple months later. And somehow I kept my job too. I don't know if that's good or bad. So that's the story. And that. No. Back to the 2-year lifespan, I think. That I don't know. She's not with our company anymore. So anyway, we've kind of gotten ahead here, but here's what we hear a lot. Reasons frequently heard to postpone. Oh, it costs too much. It's going to take too much time. It's too hard or too complex. Nalini's going to address that when that famous slide finally comes up. This one's kind of real. Is there going to be any disruption to production? That's a real issue for us. Every enterprise says that. You can't touch production. And then there's the lack of understanding and the knowledge of IPv6. So you put that all together, CIOs seem unconcerned about IPv6. That's in red. That's the core of this presentation. What the heck can we do about it? So here we go. What can get their attention? This is where I need your help. I have some ideas. We can try to scare them. I do this all the time. Oh, networks are going to change, or customers are going to change. Elliot's got a better idea than anything I'm going to say. So.
Well, no. But
I hope.
I'm not channeling anything I've learned at Cisco per se, but my wife is in a similar circumstance. I'm going to channel her. She works at a very large bank. She's responsible for DNS and DHCP at that very large bank. And she has raised this concern previously. And certainly it is the case that it's all about the money when you're working at a bank. So I said, why don't you charge for addresses? And she said, well, that's one way to go about it. And I said, now let's talk about pricing. And I said, what do you think it would take to get their attention? And she said, yeah, not much more than $1 an address because they're chintzy at the bank. Mm-hmm. And so, but the idea is that you then have to get the price model approved, which turns out to be troublesome. What I was actually going to say is that you cannot sell IPv6 as as an organic sort of thing in an internal enterprise network. I think we've been around this block so many times that if there isn't a clear need that is breathing down the management's necks, like IoT, then they're not going to get there. However, there is the access to the internet, and that's a very good place to start thinking about this and say, okay, we don't need to have all of our systems running IPv6 today. We do need to think about making sure that the customers continue to have access to our services. And that's something where IPv6 can be solved. You can say, well, our customers are beginning to have problems with our website because, well, the service providers are degrading IPv4 service, and all of a sudden you have yourself a business case. That's one point. The second point is there's another way to get your feet wet even in the enterprise, which is that you have a large number of devices that are migrating to IP still, like lights, right? Your JCI Uniphase facilities equipment is another case. And so the question is whether you're able to at least use IPv6 for the IoT componentry that is going to be connecting into your network, which provides you a way to deal with at least some of that. However, working against you on this is that you have to have the access mechanisms inside the infrastructure. One of the things that I've seen at a couple of very large enterprise sites is that they have loaded down their interior routing infrastructure with vast, vast quantities of access lists, eating out their TCAMs. So now you go from IPv4 to IPv6. You say, well, you have to have a transition plan. When we think transition, I know that Lee's going to have to talk about this, when we get going, right? But when we start thinking about transition, all of a sudden you're wondering, does my transition plan involve me quadrupling the amount of TCAM space that I need to use in my infrastructure? And so you have to be a little bit smart about exactly how you are managing your access such that that doesn't happen. Now, that's all sort of stream of conscience, but the two things that I would give advice to you is, well, you need to start monetizing internally, or at least showing the costs of retaining the existing infrastructure, because you're at an organization that deals with risk. It's all about risk and cost. There's clearly a risk with staying on IPv4. There's clearly a risk with moving to IPv6. So there has to be some model to do the quantification in order to get you through that. That's one. And the other is strongly consider just dealing with, just worrying about your external presence and managing that, because you're probably contracting out a fair amount of that anyway. And you can dump the problem on, say, an Ackermann or another organization and say, we'll need IPv6 service out of you.
Most enterprises are, we are not. But the problem's the same whether you have Ackermann do it or you do it yourself. You need to have that presence, and we don't.
Right. So I think that
is extremely well taken.
That I think is something that I would investigate.
Thank you. Great comments.
Lee Howard, I'm going to try to be fast because I want to hear the rest of what you have to say. And I'm not going to give you advice because, well, I can in other venues.
Yes, you are.
I'm not standing at the microphone to give you advice right now because because I know that you know what you're doing, and it's not you the one who needs advice. What I was going to say is related to this slide, that if I were developing a mobile app that was going to be used exclusively in some place like the US, where 98% of mobile users have IPv6, or India, where something like that number of mobile users have IPv6, I might be thinking about whether I need to pay for IPv4 at all. Developing a mobile app that's IPv6 only is becoming realistic in the next year or two. Oh, thank you. No, I want you to respond to that.
I'm not going to respond.
That's all I had to say. No.
Okay.
For now.
Hi, Michael. I'm from service provider background. So we understood can't change the mindset of the CIOs. They are not open to see because of security reason, any other reason. I'm sure money is not the criteria. But if you really see who's really paying cost for slow migration of the enterprise, it is the service providers. We believe you have a network, you have 10 offices, 20 offices, and you want to grow further. You want to grow further, you don't have IPv4, you are going to ask the service provider to pay for and provide the IPv4s, right? How the service provider, you are a very loyal, good customer for the service provider, he doesn't want to lose you. So if service provider doesn't have, he is going to buy IPv4 from the market and then provide to you. So it is the cost which is beared by the service provider. This is one type of the enterprise houses in the United States. Other, I think if you go to the root cause of this, why this is happening, why CIOs are not changing their mindset is primarily because many of the big enterprises in the United States have large IPv4 pool/seats allocated to them, which is like out of the 3.4 billion total IPv4 address which is available, majority, I think 1/3 of that IP pool is still not used and not available in the internet. Okay? Because you have that luxury, or not for that matter I'm saying it, enterprises, they have that luxury, and there is a reason they do not see the reason to migrate to IPv6. But at the same time, it's not only limited to United States, even other parts of the world where, yes, we don't want to get into IPv4 because the cost of the IPv4 is significantly increasing. Started with like $6. If you talk today, even the smaller pools are not even available in $20. So this is something I think we need to do, not with one enterprise. I think because of the IPv4 allocated by Aaron, when it was allocated, they don't have a contract in place. If they are not using for years and years, then there should be policy to come back, to gain it back. Unfortunately, that is not available today, so they're not able to, in fact, recall the IP addresses back. And that is the reason service providers are facing this problem.
Yep, good point. Will you stay there for 1 second, because I'm going to ask you a question.
Please.
I think you alluded to it, Lee did, other people have. If one thing that would drive us, and I think that's on it's on the next slide, but a lot of you have already touched on it, is if IPv4 becomes more expensive for us. In other words, you charge me a little bit more for v4. Are you willing to do that? And then what happens when the huge enterprises that are paying you a lot of money say, well, you better not charge me more, I'm going to move to somebody else. That's the problem that I see. I want that to happen, actually. I think it should happen because it's costing you more to provide it. So why shouldn't you charge us more? And when you try that, will you stick to it when we try to pressure you into not doing that? Because that's going to happen. Nalini, you heard that from one of our biggest network. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can supplement it. I think there are two types of the customer which we have currently. One set of the customer, they have been working or taking the services from the service provider. They have been loyal to this, and they say if there is any extension required, I don't think you should charge me extra because I'm asking additional IP addresses from you. One side of enterprises. The other side enterprises, yes, definitely operator can put these restrictions and say, yes, if you need additional IPv4, you are not open to move to IPv6, yes, I'm going to charge additional for providing additional IPv4 because I'm buying from somebody and providing to you. Okay? So it's both types of the conversations happening with enterprises. Some of them, they say, yes, rather than I pay to you for additional IPv4, let me prefer and invest some money in my infrastructure to migrate and make it ready for IPv6.
Oh, good. I'm encouraging you to be tough on us, because I think that's right, but sometimes the market forces things that aren't right. Thank you for that.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in here.
Try to stop her.
I'm sorry. This has been 10 years. 10 years we've been doing this, I used to have great, anyway. No, the problem is these guys are just too big. They're just too big. Somebody's going to be hungry enough to say, if you charge too much, they'll say, I won't, come to me.
Yeah, the director of our largest plan told her that a few weeks ago.
So I would actually describe that you said there are two kinds of customers. I would describe there as being two different kinds of customers, profitable and non-profitable. And if I have to buy more, if I'm an ISP, and I have to buy more IPv4 addresses, and I can't charge you to use them, you may tip, depending on the price of the addresses, you may tip from a profitable customer to a non-profitable customer. And I'm happy to see you go to my competition because I can't afford to keep you anymore. Yeah. Now, you're saying it doesn't matter. Well, that's true. In your case, you already have your address plan.
But I've been fighting going to the next slide, but you guys have hit on most of the bullets there already. Running out of addresses is an issue for us and many others. We have a Class B that I think you said that we use like 10% of it. So we could sell it, and we use the 1918 internally with 10 dots, so we don't have that issue, unfortunately.
I think I mentioned earlier the price per address is about $20 per address right now. It actually turns out to be closer to $25 per address for /16 and larger. So that's what, $1.5 million? I mean, at some point we start to say, gee, maybe maybe there's a little bit more motivation if you want to sell your addresses.
Yeah, and we're looking into that now. Thanks to you,
excellent.
by the way.
And there's I did analysis several years ago, and I presented it at pretty much every RIR, every NOG, that was as an ISP. At some point, it's more depending on your your profitability per customer. At some point, if you're giving out addresses, it makes it costs more money to buy addresses than the profitability of the customer. At some point, the prices get high enough that you're willing to say, you know what, we as an ISP are better off not connecting customers anymore. We're better off just selling addresses and getting out of the ISP business. Right. And that's somewhere between.
We're more trouble than we're worth.
Right, exactly, right. And that price, depending on how you're doing things, I calculated as being somewhere between $30 and $80 per address. And remember, I just said that prices are currently $25. Yeah. So we're actually getting to the point where where the profitability of IPv4 is quickly dwindling. There are lots of, as you point out, lots of cases where you don't cost as much for the IPv4 utilization because you're not using somebody else's addresses. But for lots of other enterprises who don't have their own blocks, or even in your case, you may have individual offices that only have their own upstream connectivity, and then you're not providing addresses to, where they will have to spend. If you're just a little insurance sales office, they may only have a /28 in v4. But a /28 can cost, a couple $100.
Yep. We have different models depending on the size of it. Yeah. We have 3 minutes left. Is that what you were going to ask me? Okay. Yeah, Michael.
Okay. So I work with an ISP in Montreal. It's fairly small, fairly new, does not have a /B, and has been struggling with, figuring out how to remove their customers out of any v4 at all. And actually, it's kind of a sad story. We actually hired about 4 years ago or something like this. We merged with another company and got a very, very dynamic VP of sales who I guess somehow, I don't know what happened, he didn't stay with the company. But we had this very interesting conversation one day at lunch when I met him, and we were talking about this issue. And he said, well, it's simply, I'm going to change the contract slightly that we give to our customers. And, so the customer says, okay, blah, 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 we're going to give you a bunch of services, it's going to be $1,000 a month. Boom, that's the thing. But in the contract, it's going to say, I understand that I am requesting IPv4 and declining the v6 only at an addition, and that it is included in my cost of $200 a month. Okay, in other words, we quoted them the whole amount, and only when they read the contract does the financial guy go, wait a minute, this could have been $650 if I had just agreed to ask about this and this and this and this. Why didn't your sales guys tell me that? Oh, well, we just assumed you weren't ready for IPv6. Oh, no, I'm ready. I mean, that's the interesting conversation,
I
right?
like that approach.
So for a bunch of customers, they're like, oh, well, I guess I can't do it. And they might actually go talk to their IT guy.
I would get the financial guys to pressure us technical folks, and
but in this case, in this case, the financial guy would say, go to the technical folks. Well, why can't I uncheck this box? Yeah. Oh, because you wouldn't give us any money to have a lab connected to the internet to v6 to figure out why it was not working, right?
Yep.
Oh, wow. So I'm.
But at least it starts the conversation.
It starts the conversation, and we didn't expect anyone to uncheck those boxes for several years, but we wanted to clue them in that they needed to pay attention. At least they needed to type it into Google at least once, right?
Thank you, and I'm getting the hook here. I want to say a couple more real quick things. The only time I've gotten any attention is when I use the CIO buzzwords. That's my term, and if you talk, they will pay attention if you say several different words like cloud, big data, SDN or SD-WAN, IoT, and enhanced security. Then they listen. And guess what? In some of those cases, you need, or it's better with IPv6. So that's the only time I get them to talk to me. Other than that, I think you saw most of these, the NAT and all that stuff. We can go over that later. We have a group in IETF that talks about this stuff, and we've said, well, maybe it's not the CIO. Maybe you should focus our attention elsewhere. Different decision makers, different technical support people. I'm not going to go through this right now in the interest of time, but that's something we need to consider. Who is our real target? Who do we need to convince to move this along? Now, Nalini, you can start to go to the mic, and I'll walk away. One approach we've come up with is that if people don't understand IPv6 from a technical standpoint or a business standpoint, maybe that's why there's that consternation and reluctance. So let's go with this approach at the technical level, and Nalini just gave a free class, which was fantastic and attended by what, like 130 people or something like that. And we're going to follow it up with some decision maker level presentations, which Lee is going to start doing with me in December. We think that combination will start to get people interested in IPv6. Number one, find out it's really not that bad, not that hard, not that complex. And there's some advantages there, like PDM, which I didn't even get a chance to open my big mouth about. And then after the technicians are saying, hey, this isn't so bad, we could do this, then hit the decision makers and tell them why it's good from a business, financial, and other standpoint. That's our double-pronged approach, and Nalini and Lee are doing that now, so I'm going to turn it over to you guys to say whatever you want to say about this. And you have 0 seconds. No.
Yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm
Does everybody want to see me pull her off the stage? Come on.
Like really, really quick. I'm going to do it. Yeah, so, yeah, we had 130 people from enterprises from over 70 companies, and actually we're going to have a lab that one of the universities, hopefully University of New Hampshire Interoperability Lab, they're going to build a lab and staff it, and Lee and I are going to teach all next year. And we're going to, we can't do everything for free, but we're going to do a ton. And I have a lot of the people writing back to me and saying, I am so looking forward to class next year. This was so fun. I was like totally not terrified. And so, yeah, so if we can do that and then do the double hit with a free lab, these guys are, there's something really wrong with these people, but anyway. And then use NIST to go to the CIO level. At least that's what we're thinking. And so, sorry, Mike.
No, that's great. So I'm done. I was actually expecting that we would spend all of our time on this slide where you all could tell me, but everybody's told me interactively throughout the course of this presentation what your thoughts were, what your great ideas were. I really appreciate it. We're out of time, so anyone that wants to talk about this later, to me, to Lee, to Nalini, or anybody else, please do. This is an important topic, and I really appreciate your input and thoughts.
Thank you so much, Mike.